Welcome back to Telltale Books. I'm Greg,
I'm Emily.
and we are continuing in our series on Robert A. Heinlein with his fourth published story called Requiem.
Which I apologize, guys. I forgot to read. So Greg is going to kind of take the reins on this one. I do intend to read it.
Okay.
So it will be read.
And so the story was published in the January 1940 issue of Astounding Science Fiction. And it's part of his larger future history stories, but specifically is about a character named D.D. Harriman, who he wrote three stories about: Requiem, Excarus, I think I misspelled that, and The Man Who Sold the Moon.
Mm-hmm.
And D.D. Harriman, need to kind of introduce the character because the story is totally character focused. For those of you who think there's no characterization in classic science fiction and that it's all idea, this is a character story entirely. D.D. Harriman is a guy who comes from kind of the Robert Heinlein generation of kids growing up with science fiction, dreaming of going to the moon, going into outer space, and wishing, hoping someday they'll be able to stand on the moon and look back at the Earth. So Harriman, he's not a scientist, and he's not an astronaut. He gets a business job, but he becomes filthy rich. And so he, at one point, despite his wife's objections, he cashes in everything and invests in rocket businesses.
Oh, man.
And by doing that, he basically this is going to sound like Mr. Tesla. He basically comes into control of the entire space industry.
Whoa.
So his businesses collectively invent the technology, perfect the technology, and go into space, and they build moon bases and stuff, and man gets a presence in space. And this is all happening in his lifetime. And he's an old man, but because of the fact that he wasn't a scientist, he wasn't an astronaut, he wasn't physically fit to go into space, he's been earthbound the whole time. But his greatest dream was to go into outer space before he dies. Story's called Requiem. You know what's coming, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so what he does, there are these guys that, if you know anything about the old barnstormers, they were guys in the early days of aviation. They would get a biplane and they would go to state fairs and stuff, and they would go and do acrobatics in the air.
Yeah.
In this story, there are guys who do that with rockets.
That's cool.
They have their own rocket planes, and they're doing acrobatics for show at state fairs. So he goes to this fair and finds these two guys. They have this broken down rocket, and he convinces them to go in league with him. He gives them all the money they need, and they secretly, because the government wouldn't allow just anybody to do this, the government and the businesses control all this stuff. And they have their rules, and they would never allow this to happen, which is true today. So he secretly has these guys find a rocket that would just be a stratosphere plane like they use at the fairs. Find a new rocket because theirs is old and decrepit. And he ships them the extra parts they need to convert it to go into space and go to the moon.
That's cool.
So they secretly build this in the Arizona desert.
Nice. Because where else would you build this? Right. Yeah.
Well, somebody catches wind of what's going on in the desert, and this agent goes to shut them down, but they kill the agent and they take off.
Nice. Nice.
Because Heinlein, being a libertarian, does not believe in the government telling individual people what they can and cannot do. So he feels he has every right to take this rocket and go into space. Rules be damned, because he is not going to die before he goes into outer space. And so he goes into outer space. He survives the launch,
Mm-hmm.
and they move him to the window where at one point he's able to see the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have to turn the rocket around to go to the moon. And so he's able to see the moon and watch them land on the moon.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets out of a special hammock that was protecting him from the G-forces, and puts on they help him into a spacesuit, and he goes out on the moon. And of course, that's where he dies.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the guys buries him on the moon.
Aw, that's kind of sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Bittersweet story, but he gets his dream.
Yeah.
That's cool. I like that story.
Yeah, and what I love about this story is that it's not really talking about the future. It's talking about all the guys that founded science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
This was all of their dreams.
Mm-hmm.
They all wanted that. They all wanted to go into the moon. They all wanted to go into space. They all wanted to see that all happen.
Mm-hmm.
And they all had the dream of someday being in outer space.
Yeah.
And of course, we haven't moved fast enough. None of them have been able to get there.
Mm-hmm.
So they live, Heinlein, Asimov, Clarke, they all lived their lives on Earth and were never able to realize that dream. But they did at least live to see other people go out there.
Yeah. And they got to live it through their stories, but it's not the same.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But the story isn't about the future. It was about the present, and all the science fiction writers and science fiction fans that were part of a small community that really believed in this stuff in 1940, when everybody else was ridiculing them and saying they were weird and all that science fiction stuff. It's just kids stuff that you need to grow out of.
Yeah. And it's like, no, this is the future.
Mm-hmm.
We want this to be the future, and we'd love to see it in our lifetime.
And the future didn't turn out exactly as they saw, but a lot of the things they wrote about did come true. Mm-hmm. They built it, though.
Yeah.
Not anybody else. It was
and
their
now it's
dreams.
only the millionaires who get to go to space.
Yeah.
A rocket that looks like a dick.
Well, I mean, that's the case in Requiem. This guy, he was the richest man in the world, D.D. Harriman.
But there were those Joe Schmoes who were like, yeah, we'll do this for you. We want it too.
Yeah.
They at least got to do something with it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's cool, though.
Mm-hmm. So, very fun story, but very poignant story and brilliant story. Written at the perfect time. And also, looking backward, the perfect story about science fiction in 1940 and what Astounding stood for, and Heinlein stood for, and the other writers of that generation stood for.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
What a great story. So how do you feel? Do you feel it's a top tale?
Oh, definitely.
Okay. It's a top tale then.
It's a top tale. And I have it in the Pass Through Tomorrow, which Vanna will hold up for you.
Yes. I will get it. The Past Through Tomorrow.
And unfortunately, this book is not in print anymore. It should be.
Has this really cool back.
This is one of those things that the publishers should just keep it in the stores forever, because it's such a brilliant collection of stories spanning the greatest period of the development of science fiction.
The Golden Age.
Mm-hmm. And by one of the best writers. I mean, criticize Heinlein however you want. He was brilliant. Here's a story. Everybody is constantly talking about how there's no good characterization in classic science fiction. Read Requiem.
Yeah, Requiem is definitely
excellent characterization. Excellent character story. It's not an idea story. It is a character story.
It's sort of an idea story, but it's a hopeful for the future that this is what we want to see.
But it's really talking about
but it really is about the person
who
himself.
Stands for the people, like Heinlein and the other people of that time.
Nice. Very nice.
Mm-hmm.
It's good things. I can't wait to read it. I feel bad that I didn't.
You should.
I'm going to. It will happen. It will be read.
And we're gonna put this off a little while because it's a longer work.
Mm-hmm.
It's a short novel.
Okay.
If this goes on, that'll be our next Robert Heinlein.
If this goes on. Okay.
It was technically his second novel, but first one published. But
Mm-hmm.
by today's standards, it's more of a novella.
Okay.
But it was serialized in 2 different issues of Astounding Stories. So
Okay.
a little longer.
Nice.
It's going to take us a little longer to read.
Alrighty. Well, I look forward to it.
Okay.
Anything else?
That's it. Go
All
out
right.
and read Requiem. I recommend it. It's a top tale. It's an excellent tale.
I
If you
intend to
love-
read it. I'll
if
get
you
there.
love science fiction, if you love space, this is the story for you. And it's just a short story. It's not going to take tons of time.
Thanks for joining us, guys. We will see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.